All right. Hello, everyone. Ever since I learned the term millennial pause, it's the only thing I can think about once I started recording. If you guys know what that term is, millennials apparently don't start speaking until 2 seconds after a recording starts. Anyway, welcome, Christopher and Scott. We got here now as my co-host for the JavaScript Jam podcast. If you listen to JavaScript Jam live, you already know who we are. If you're just finding this video on YouTube or something, welcome. We're going to be talking about create-t3-app today, and we're really happy to have one of the core members here with us. Christopher, why don't you intro yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. So my name is Christopher. I'm a teacher turned developer. In my day job, I kind of do normal web dev, and then at night, I am on the core team of create-t3-app, and I also work on tRPC quite a bit, specifically sort of docs and DevRel type stuff. And I would say my overall goal in all of this is to make web dev easier and more accessible, and that takes many forms. So I make YouTube videos, I write docs, I do translation, all kinds of stuff, basically.
Yeah, I'm super excited for what you've been doing because I've been seeing you get more involved with these type of activities, having already been just someone who kind of hangs out and contributes to these projects. And I think assuming more of like a DevRel type role is a really good fit for you. And especially because you used to be a teacher. This is something that people who know me well know that I got my start as a music teacher.
Hmm.
And transitioning from a teaching role into DevRel, I find is just a really good fit because if you do DevRel well, if you're not selling something, you're hopefully explaining something, and that really involves having teacherly abilities.
Yeah, that definitely. And I also think like it's kind of difficult sometimes with DevRel to see the impact or like to measure it. And that's kind of similar to teaching where, you talk to people and like if you do great, then they will do better than if you hadn't done great. But it's very difficult to put it down to numbers a lot of the time. And I think it's like a very similar approach in many ways.
Yeah, it's a very holistic kind of activity because it's hard to just point to specific metrics, which is why
Mhm.
we lean very heavily into like testing in our schooling because then we have at least some metric, even if it's not necessarily the best metric to point to. But there's no like you don't even give tests to people after you do like a DevRel presentation, so it's really hard to know whether what you explain actually makes sense or not. So I find that really engaging the audience and always being like, does this make sense? Do people have questions? Or it's like asking them point blank, like, do you know what this means? And kind of like prompt
Yeah.
people to specifically say either a yes or no, whether they understand what you're saying or not.
Yeah, I found one really good tool for that is Discord and Twitter and just seeing what questions people have or what people complain about. Because like you don't know how docs or how a tool will be for somebody who doesn't know about it because like you always come from that position of already knowing a decent bit about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'd be curious, Scott, you're someone who you're going through a process of kind of starting to learn more about web dev and hone your skills. And, all of us are always in a place where we're always learning, but I think that you kind of see yourself as still kind of like a student of coding in a way. But I
Yep.
think that you're coming up in a place where there's a lot of really good educational material. The problem is almost that there's too much of it. Like, how do you kind of
True.
parse through when you're trying to learn something, or do you not even bother and just ask ChatGPT everything now?
Yes. Oh, this is a great question. So, first of all, thanks. Appreciate being able to come on here and do this with you guys. But yeah, so as far as like learning goes, you were saying, I was thinking when you guys were saying what you're just saying now, I was like, maybe you should like host a hackathon right after your sesh and do like a little run through with people to see how they actually absorbed and did things. But anyway, yeah, as far as me personally, yeah, I'm definitely still on the, as we all know, developing in web development is a lifelong journey. We're always learning new things and, expanding our knowledge base and all that. But yes, I would consider myself in the student era of my journey. And it's been very exciting so far. I'm actually doing like 100 days of coding just to kind of really focus on improving my skill sets in that area. And so, like you said, there's so many things out there now as far as like where to learn, who to learn from, what to learn. And that's great because here's the thing, like everybody's different and everybody learns differently, and everybody connects with someone differently. Like, Christopher's story or Anthony, your story might, better be fit for a certain type of person, or a certain person that can relate with your background, right? And so that's
say especially people who had humanities degrees.
There you go. So if you have had a humanities degree, you probably want to follow Anthony, right? So just because y'all can relate on that personal level, and then therefore you're probably more open to listening to that person and absorbing what they have to say because of that, right? It's a psychological kind of thing. Now, you're definitely right. I've been through like so many classes online and Udemy's and this and that sits and what sits galore. But and so there's like this overwhelming amount of stuff, and eventually you just got to like take action, right? And
I would also
actually
hazard a guess that through going through a lot of those materials, you may not have actually gotten a ton of value out of them. Certainly not as much as maybe the marketing pages were saying you would get.
Totally. Absolutely. No, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. Not to bash everything out there, but I would say that you get to a point where you're just copying and pasting so much that you're not really learning as much as you'd want to. And you just want to dig in and start creating a project, which I have done in the past, where I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to create something on my own and start this process and see where it leads me. Right. But the beautiful thing about ChatGPT, because here's the thing, I did like stop for a while learning coding, and I was just like, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm just going to focus on my roots, my skill set that I currently have, which is marketing and sales and things like that. And I have a lot of technology. That's funny. Anyway, so. But I was like, you know what? When ChatGPT came out and I started messing with it and using it for like some marketing stuff, then I started like messing with it and seeing what I could do with coding stuff, and like hearing everybody talking in the coding and dev world, like, hey, you can use this to create apps. You can use this to create, all these other things, right? Blah, blah, blah. And so I said, you know what? Let me see with someone with not as much knowledge as someone who has a ton of knowledge in developing, if I could manage to do something, right? And so then I said, all right, so I started typing in, like, giving an example of what I wanted to create, right? This like tweet tracking, retweet tracking app for this giveaway that we're actually going to be doing this week. But anyway, and so I started just iterating and talking back and forth with ChatGPT. This went on for like a 5-hour conversation. And it was amazing what came out at the end. And I've, errors, and then asking it to debug things and all kinds of stuff. And it's amazing what this can do. And it's like having your best friend available at all times of the night to be able to say, hey, Anthony, instead of calling you up and saying, hey, can you help me with this code, right? And tell me what's wrong with this piece here, and help me to guide me in the right direction, right? I can just say the same thing to ChatGPT, and it instantly gives me the answer, and I don't have to bother you at 2 a.m, or 12.
Well, I mean, that I go to bed at 4,
I know.
usually. So. No, I mean, if you ever sent me a random code message, I would not mind.
I know you
would.
Absolutely.
I would appreciate it. But I've seen you. I've been watching you go through this journey, and I'm glad you're doing it. I'm really glad you're doing it publicly, because I've been telling people this for months now. Some people get it. Some people think I'm crazy, where I say ChatGPT is going to be a personal teacher for everyone, and that way you can use with it. Now, this doesn't mean teachers go away. This means teachers' jobs become slightly different, and even more important, because they need to make sure that these learning machines are well calibrated to teach them the right thing. So there's still a huge role for teachers here. I know, Chris, you and I have chatted online about ChatGPT a little bit. We were talking about more so the nature of like how it can be used for cheating, which is another really important conversation. But I would be curious, like, what's been your take from what you've done so far with ChatGPT?
For me, I've never been good at remembering things. So like my brain is just a set of pointers to stuff I can Google, basically. And ChatGPT has been really good for that.
That's amazing.
I find it doesn't replace understanding a system, because you need to know what to ask it or what to Google for. I've basically found it to be like a very strong Google that confidently lies occasionally.
That's true too. I have caught it in a few lies.
I use it all the time to draft emails and stuff like that, and then go over them and make them better, because it does sometimes go into certain routes of formulating stuff that I'm not that fond of, that sound very cookie cutter. But yeah, it's a huge time saver, and I think it's going to make a lot of things easy, but I'm not yet convinced that it will replace anything. It's just like one additional thing that we have access to.
An amazing tool. Absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly. I'd use it for all the things you just said too. So, yes.
And with teaching, I've always found that the most exciting part of teaching is kind of seeing where somebody is and like helping them figure out where they need to go next. And I think that's where humans will remain extremely valuable. Because
sure.
like the sum of human knowledge is always going to have more knowledge about like any specific topic than a human will, but it doesn't replace, I think, experience and talking to a person and like doing the more soft side of teaching.
Yeah, ChatGPT is like the ultimate generalist. It knows a lot of stuff about a lot of stuff, but if you put it against a human specialist on anything, it's going to eventually find out where it's lying, where it's making stuff up, where its knowledge base kind of runs out or falls off a cliff because it wasn't able to be trained on this one set of data, but it was trained on this other set of data. I think that's going to be really interesting, is like once we're able to just feed it the sum total of the internet, I'd be really curious to see what it would start putting out. But my only worry is that people don't want to give it the sum total of the internet because they're afraid of what it's going to end up start saying.
I'm also really excited to see how good Copilot will get once like your average computer can process enough tokens to have an entire code base in it.
Have you seen Copilot Chat?
I've not used it yet. I don't have access to it yet.
Yeah, so I didn't even know this was a thing. I saw Rizelle, she works at GitHub and actually becoming like a Copilot DevRel. She's written Copilot blog posts on the GitHub blog. They're really good. She was just coding around in her IDE, and she has a chat interface in her VS Code that lets her talk to Copilot as if it were ChatGPT. And I'm like, well, this is the thing. This is what everyone wants. So keep an eye on that. That's something I should probably get on the wait list for that, or bug Rizelle and see if she can get me in the back door.
Yeah, I've seen the thing where you can highlight code and say, explain this, and that actually works shockingly well, I found. Like occasionally it just completely bugs out and like says the same sentence 30 times in a row, or does one of the weird AI glitchy things. But yeah, so, for domains where I'm not so comfortable with, I found it very helpful just to get told what to Google for, kind of.
So quick question then. I've looked at Copilot. I haven't really messed with it at all. My question is, how much would you say you would spend on Copilot? Is it worth the cost?
I think it's worth $10 a month easily.
That's what it is. Okay. I didn't know exactly how much it was. Cool.
Yeah, it's partly to know how much money you have and how valuable saving coding time is for you. I'd be willing to bet there'd be companies that would pay $100 a head for it.
Yeah, I think if you're a company and you're giving your developers, $3,000 computers and probably like $1,000 a month in various subscriptions to productivity tools and like management tools, then to say no to Copilot feels strange to me at this point.
That's a really good point.
Good call out.
Fantastic point. Yeah. Okay, we could talk about ChatGPT literally for hours. So I'm going to transition us to create-t3-app. Everyone I talk to, one of the first questions I ask them these days is, "What do you think about ChatGPT?" Let's talk about ChatGPT. He's all like obsessed with it, but so create-t3-app. This is what I am super excited about because it is, to me, very much in line with what I've been talking about literally for like 3 years now. People who know me and follow my work know that I'm all about the full stack jam stack, which is not a term you'll really hear in the create-t3 world, but it kind of describes, I think, for the way I describe it, it's like taking a Jamstack kind of site. So you can think of a classic Next.js front end, could be static, could have a couple API serverless function routes, could be using Prisma, but really the idea is that you want to build like a full stack application where that talks to a database. So there's this decoupled aspect to it. There's a front end and a backend is not a monolithic thing. But the hard part has been just building that, because in the past, everyone started with the front end using a framework and then built their own backend, however you would want to do that. And then when things like Redwood and Blitz came around, they're like, hey, we're going to give you conventions for your backend so you have some good patterns in terms of how you manage accessing the database, how you manage authenticating your users. And then Blitz kind of went through this weird migration journey to where they forked next, and then they said they were going to change what they are. And I haven't really paid attention to it that recently, so I'm not really sure where they're at. Redwood has continued on doing its thing, and people who don't like GraphQL have kind of resisted it. And then create-t3-app came out, which was more so in the Blitz angle, where they're saying, we're going to take Next.js and just build the rest of the stuff on the end instead of building a brand new front-end framework and a brand new back-end framework. But the secret sauce, and why I'm really glad to have you here, also has been tRPC. That's really the thing that's made it different from any framework that came before it. So what is tRPC, and what makes it so crucial for create-t3-app?
So tRPC is basically a way to create APIs with really good developer experience. That to me is like the shortest explanation. You get the sort of the simplicity of REST, like you don't need to write a schema, you don't need to do anything, but you get some of the advantages of GraphQL. So specifically, your front end knows what routes there are in your backend and what the input and output types of those are. And I think the hole it really fills is like if you start to develop, you learn React or Vue or whatever, and then you learn Express. And then what? Like there's so many different ways to go from there. I think it's very helpful to kind of give one set of decisions that are like, here's a set of decisions. It's pretty good. There's other viable ones, but a lot of people are making this combination of decisions, and so if you also make them, there's support for it. You can talk to people who are using the same stuff. And also all of it is fairly easy to move away from if you decide you need something else in the future. I would say that's kind of like why create-t3-app, I think, has worked quite well. And also sort of the main thing about tRPC, because with GraphQL, like once you buy in, you're really bought into GraphQL. And it's an awesome place to be. Like you get that type safety, you get everything the schema gives you. But with tRPC, you're buying into a lot less, I would say. Like you're buying into writing functions that you can copy and paste into an Express or a Fastify API in the future.
Yeah, I hear people make this argument a lot. I learned GraphQL faster than I learned tRPC. That's all I can say from my own personal experience, and everyone's experience is going to be different. And yeah, I think that if you're an experienced developer who's been doing a lot of JavaScript and have been writing Node backends, I could see how you could pick up tRPC really, really quickly, because as you say, you're writing like JavaScript functions. And when you look at the code, you're looking at JavaScript code. And for someone who is kind of new at JavaScript, that's extremely challenging, because JavaScript code is extremely challenging when you first learn it. And so it really just depends, I think, where you are in your journey. If you haven't learned a whole lot of JavaScript yet, learning the GraphQL conventions won't necessarily be any more challenging, because you're starting from zero. You don't know anything. But if you already have your really strong JavaScript skills, then I can see how someone would look at tRPC and be like, oh, this immediately makes sense to me. I can tell exactly what's going on here. It took me a little bit more time, but also because the docs, I think, have been improving since I first got into it, and I've written some of my own blog posts now. So I feel like as the docs improve, that's going to really ramp up people even quicker on tRPC.
Yeah, the docs were really not great at the start. They've improved enormously in the last couple of months, thanks to like 2 or 3 people from the community who really stepped up and started writing them. I've written a couple pages, but mostly it's been other people so far.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just going to be a good tutorial. Like for me, I'm really big on end-to-end tutorials, and like starting from a blank project and then building a project that kind of walks you through some key parts of it. So this is what I did in mine. I showed how you first can just create a single file tRPC backend. Then I showed how you can break out the context. Then I showed how you can break out individual routes. And I showed how you can put a front end on it and connect the front end to it. And then I showed how you can migrate it to a Next.js backend. So it was like really, really step-by-step kind of thing that I didn't feel like I could get from the docs. And it took me like 3 months. It took me a long time to write that blog post. But yeah, it's so feel free to look at that and check out the structure and see if there's anything you want to pull from it, because I think getting a tutorial in will help a lot with the docs. And someone actually opened like an issue or a PR for it after I posted my blog post, and they're like, "Here, look at this. This looks really good." So that I was like, that made me so happy to see that.
Yeah, I'll definitely look it up. There's also a couple of other ones I want to shout out to anybody who's trying to get into tRPC.
Yeah, and we'll put links in the show notes so people check those out.
Yeah, so Nexel, the creator of create-t3-app, wrote a blog post about like how to write a full stack app with create-t3-app, and he, together with somebody else, has been keeping it updated every time any of the syntax changes and all that. Then number 2 is Jack Harrington, who is just an awesome web dev teacher on YouTube. He's who I learned React from. Did a video with create-t3-app, showing tRPC and everything around it. And then finally, Theo released a 3-hour mega tutorial like 2-3 weeks ago, which I haven't watched yet, but because it's 3 hours, but I'm sure it's really, really good.
Yeah, could you either drop those in the chat here or like send them to me on Discord or something, just so we have those now, need to go fishing for them in post?
Is it okay if I find them after the show?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, and I know all 3 of what you're talking about, so I can find them as well. Yeah, those are great resources. Yeah, do you have any questions right now, Scott?
No, so I'm excited to dig in and check out what's going on.
Sweet. Yeah, I think we're probably good to start getting into some coding, unless there's anything else you want to talk about, Chris, as like a kind of a place setting for what we're going to show.
No, I think let's jump right into it.
Sweet. And then I'm going to show us a little bit how to deploy it as well. I know you had been curious about some Fly stuff, so that'll be something that we can show how to do. So you can go ahead and kick us onto the screen sharing mode, Scott.
There we go.
All right, and this is the homepage. So the homepage used to just be like a single command that said run this command. It used to just be basically this part, and then it said like create-t3-app on top. But there's a brand new homepage now, which is pretty cool. So people go to create-t3-app.gg. They will find this. It shows what the different pieces are of the stack. So we talked about the top row already, how it's a Next.js front end, and we're using tRPC for the APIs. You want to talk a little bit about, people already know about Tailwind, so we need to talk about Tailwind, but you want to talk about Prisma and NextAuth a little bit, and why you think those are kind of like a good fit for this stack?
Yeah, sure. So with Prisma, the main thing is that for a long time, it's been like the best way to talk to your database in a type-safe way. So you write your Prisma schema, or you just connect to an existing database and tell it to introspect, and then it writes the schema for you. And then you have kind of these functional ways to like declaratively write what you want to get out of your database or what you want to put into your database. And then those things are just typed correctly, and you don't need to do anything for that. And that's really essential in terms of having the correct return types on your tRPC endpoints. So that's the main reason we went with Prisma, basically DX. And with NextAuth, same thing kind of. It's just, I would say, the easiest way to set up provider-based auth in the JavaScript ecosystem. So in the case of create-t3-app, if you want to use the Discord provider that we include, you just need to get a Discord developer account, copy and paste your ID and your secret into your .env file, and then your auth works. And that's super powerful.
I am curious. So I know that I've been seeing Theo talk about Clerk a lot more, and Clerk is an authentication company. And when you use, if you were to use Clerk, would that integrate with NextAuth, or would it replace NextAuth?
It would replace NextAuth.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, because I find that this is where Redwood went really heavy into third-party providers for auth. We have like 7 of them. You could use Auth0, you could use Clerk, you could use Super Tokens. There's a set of like 7 of them. And then we have our own like auth abstraction, so that when you're using any of those providers, you have a kind of generic like use auth hook. And so that seemed to be like the thing Redwood built seemed to be kind of a layer like NextAuth. and then that integrates with third-party providers. So I would be curious if NextAuth is going to eventually kind of build in the ability to integrate with different providers. I'm not really sure. Like this is where my knowledge kind of runs out, because I don't know a ton about how all these different auth things work. But yeah, like if you were to tell someone like whether to just stick with NextAuth or whether to evaluate Clerk, kind of what would you say to that?
I would say there could be a possibility that NextAuth creates sort of a provider for Clerk or for another paid thing in the future. Currently, I don't think anything like that exists. The main decision is going to be with NextAuth, you basically own your auth, but it's abstracted. So you use your own database. It's all free. But it has certain limits. For example, it doesn't really integrate with React Native very well. Whereas Clerk, you give away some amount of control, but you also get a lot of quality of life back for it, and a lot of additional features that NextAuth doesn't have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
With create-t3-app, I think we're always going to stay with things that are free to use, because we want people to be able to start apps for free, basically. And with just create-t3-app and the free tier of Vercel and the free tier of any database provider, you can get a real app going without ever paying anyone any money. But yeah, Clerk is also super awesome and really powerful.
Cool. Awesome. And then here we got some community links. The Discord goes to Theo's Discord, I'm assuming. And then they got a GitHub, and Twitter just goes to Theo's Twitter right now. Hey, you took my tweet off. Aw.
Yeah, we took it off because Twitter kept breaking, so we just temporarily removed all of it.
Just grab some screenshots like everyone else does.
Yeah.
Like most people don't actually pipe in a literal tweet to show a testimonial.
Yeah, we're going to bring that back in the near future.
Yeah, it used to be previously, if you would go on here and you would scroll down, you would see my little donut face talking about how I think create-t3-app is super awesome. And that was a tweet I wrote back in like July when I first discovered it. And I was saying how I think that it's the first true kind of competitor to Redwood to come out. And I remember at the time, Theo had like never even thought about it as like something that was even comparable to Redwood or would be existing in the same space. I'm just like, no, it's like almost identical, actually.
And the funniest thing is, I don't remember why this was, but every time our Twitter API token stopped working, the fallback was your tweet, but 4 times, so you could scroll through it.
Yes,
but it was all your
right.
tweets.
It was only me, yeah. So that was the funniest part of the bug, is that you would just read 5 testimonials by me.
You're the only proof.
So funny. I mean, that's all you need, right? As long as you know I'm using it, then you're like, who cares what Ken C. Dots thinks?
Right.
Okay, cool. So these are the docs here. So the docs are built with Astro. I was actually chatting with the team when they first created this, and they just like ran with it and built out a really awesome thing here. We have a couple deployment steps. So these I've worked on. I wrote the Netlify. See how fast that, like the page.
That's why I said, look how fast that was.
Yeah, no, totally.
Really fast.
Yeah, so this is a good place to go to get started, but to actually start building things, you go to this installation page. So what do you use when you're using create-t3-app? Do you use NPM, Yarn, or PNPM?
I use PNPM, and I finally started actually typing PNPM create or PNPX. I used to like use PNPM for my packages and then still use NPX for like terminal commands, but
right,
I've finally grown fully into the PNPM habit.
Forgive my ignorance. I know NPM. I do not know PNPM.
Do you know Yarn though?
Yes, I've used it.
So you can kind of think of PNPM as something that was built to expand on what Yarn did, because Yarn abdicated its ability to innovate. They basically put out Yarn 2 and the community wholesale rejected it and no one upgraded. And then they put out Yarn 3, and by that point, most people had kind of given up on it. So a lot of the innovations that Yarn brought in, like workspaces, were eventually integrated by NPM. But the original problem with NPM and why Yarn was used and adopted by a lot of people is because NPM is really slow. There's something about how the tool itself is created that just makes it slower than what it could be. So Yarn was faster, But then because of all the upgrade problems, people didn't want to use Yarn as much, but they also didn't want to go back to NPM. And so PNPM offered a kind of alternative. They do this fancy thing where they can globally cache your node modules, so you can have less node modules flying around your computer. This also makes it incompatible in certain ways because of its dependency resolution with NPM and Yarn. So when you're trying to use all three of them, you're going to run into like the biggest headaches of your life. Ideally, the tool maintainers go through that pain, so you don't have to, and you can just use any of them and they will all work just fine. But I would recommend for you, Scott, starting to try out PNPM. I think it's mature enough now that you'll probably be able to use it a lot and not hit kind of weird issues. But I'm a big fan of it.
What about like version control with everything in PNPM?
So that's going to be the same across all of them. All of them can be used to just upgrade your dependencies in package.json
and downgrade.
And downgrade. Yeah, exactly. And
issues.
And then you'll also manage your node version through a kind of higher level tool like Volta. So I use Volta and I use that to manage my node versions. And then I also install NPM Yarn and PM3M through Volta as well.
Not to go down a rabbit hole too much further here, but I use Homebrew for like Node and all that. So
Homebrew is what you use to install either Node directly or Volta.
Got it.
Yeah. So I install. So this is my. So I get fresh. If I were to get a fresh computer, I would install Homebrew. I would use Homebrew to install Volta. I would use Volta to install Node and PNPM.
Got it. All right. Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. All right, here's a fun little Easter egg for people. So when you're going through this, most people are probably going to select TypeScript because the whole point of this is to have a TypeScript project. So you may be wondering, why would they give you a JavaScript option? Wouldn't that like not work? And you were correct. It will not actually let you select JavaScript. It's a red herring. This is one of those little details that just cracked me up so much and was like, any project that actually has a sense of humor to me is like instantly ahead of the game.
Yeah, we get a GitHub issue about this occasionally where people complain, but we're gonna stick with this for as long as we possibly can, and probably forever.
And if it has Theo involved, I'm sure.
Okay, and then what it does is it asks you which of these you want to add on. This is another cool thing about create-t3-app is that it's modular in the sense that when you generate a project, it doesn't just give you all this stuff out of the box and kind of give you this massive project with all these dependencies that you need to manage. It can be, you can actually ignore all these and just generate like a fresh next app that's configured well with TypeScript. And that was a good use case for it kind of before the next project themselves went all in on TypeScript. But what I usually do when I do this and I'm doing demos, we're not going to have enough time to do like a whole auth integration. So I'm going to install these three and then leave off next auth. And then that will give us everything we need to set up our database, to have some nice little styling, and then include our tRPC. And then I'm going to select yes.
Including next auth on stream is just a great way to leak your environment credentials.
That's right. Yeah.
Not if you have the, what was that thing you sent me?
Oh, Cloak. Yeah, the VS Code Cloak extension. This option was not here a couple months ago. What is this?
So this is an import alias, which means that instead of importing from .. / whatever, you can just import from like this alias, and then it's relative to your source folder. Which means if you move files around, your imports don't break. I also find it easier to parse. Of course, relative imports still work, but this is just a nice little quality of life thing.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, that's something that Redwood manages internally for you. I think with some sort of like Babel magic. So that's the kind of thing that I never think about relative versus non-relative imports anyway. So that's a very nice touch. I'm glad to see other projects investing in that kind of stuff. Okay, now this is going to install our dependencies. And then this is for the environment variables. Something interesting. Could you talk a little bit about how they're able to make environment variables type safe? That's something that I still don't see very often.
Yeah, so we got this through the collaboration of a couple of really awesome people. So Colin from Zod, Joshua who works on TSLint, I think Daniel Rowe from Nuxt helped with it a bit as well. And basically, the very short version of what we do is we run your environment variables through Zod, which is a way to validate that data has the shape that you say it has. And so if you try to start your app and you're missing an environment variable, or you have it set to something that doesn't make sense, for example, like it needs to be a number, but you have some letters in there or something like that, then your app will blow up immediately when you start it, and not 2 hours later when you don't even remember anymore like why it could possibly be going wrong.
Totally. Yeah, no, that's really, really great. Environment variables is one of the most common source of bugs and frustration and things like that. So I want to just actually quickly show this project structure. So the most important things that people are going to want to know about is the Prisma folder, which has the Prisma schema in it. And then the vast majority of stuff exists within our SRC directory. So if you're someone who has seen a Next project before, then the pages folder should look familiar. And then you'll have your API, which is where the serverless function stuff happens, or edge functions if you want to do that. So let's talk like bleeding edge stuff just very, very quickly. What's the status on the app directory and on just general getting it current with what's happening with Next.js?
The big thing we're waiting for is the mutations RFC from Vercel, basically, or from the React team, and from the React team on what they're doing, then from Vercel on what they're going to be doing with Next, because that is going to influence how tRPC works and what its role is going forward.
Okay,
in terms
really
of like
interesting,
where
yeah.
we are now, the goal of create-t3-app is like to be a reasonable set of choices to start an app with now. So we're not actually that obsessed with like being on the very bleeding edge, if that makes sense. So like if I had to recommend somebody how to start an app, if you need to start it today, I would still say pages directory. And so that's what we're shipping for the time being. We have a lot of different explorations of tRPC, and you can use it with the app directory just kind of like in client components, or you can also use callers to get stuff in server components and then pipe it down to client components. But the big missing piece, and I think the mutations RFC and what Next does with that is going to kind of influence how that goes, but it's basically invalidation across the server boundary. Because
sounds
if
complicated.
we want to, Sachin and Julius from the tRPC team have been doing really amazing work on like digging into the canary releases of Next and figuring out like what direction it might be going in. But in terms of create-t3-app, we want to ship like a really good developer experience on day one when we upgrade. So that takes priority over being the first people to be on the newest stuff.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And it especially makes sense for create-t3-app to lag behind the rest, because first Next has to implement the cutting edge React features. Then tRPC has to figure out how to integrate with Next. And then create-t3-app needs to figure out how to take the new tRPC and then integrate it with the rest of the application. So at this point, if they're still working things out in the lower levels of that chain, then the upper level create-t3-app is like, just chill, like use the old stuff. It still works. There's no reason not to. Let them kind of work out the guts. And then that stuff is going to kind of rise to the top once it just needs to be implemented in the meta framework instead of the meta framework.
Yeah, and it's definitely the biggest question we get right now. So what I would say is like, we're going to be on it as soon as it makes sense to be on it, which hopefully is a couple of weeks from now.
Cool. Yeah, and also, stress to people that React Server components were announced in December of 2020. So you can wait a couple weeks or a month or something to use your app directory, and you can chill out and stop asking questions about it in the Discord. Okay, let's go ahead and start off our dev server here. So this is going to show us our cool little splash page. So I like this. It's really clean. It's really simple. It's just got some links to the docs if you need it. I would recommend including a link I think this, oh no, yeah. So it used to have 6 panels of each of the different pieces of tech. I would recommend throwing on 2 more panels here, one for links to the community, and then one for links to maybe the GitHub repo. That would be my recommendation.
I can see that, although I want to, like, I'm always looking at, like, what can I still remove from this? Like, not what can be added.
But you can't remove the community.
What we found was that we got a lot of questions from people who like didn't set up their environment variables or didn't push their Prisma schema. And so, yeah, like so now at the end when the command line finishes running, we say like all the stuff you need to do to get your app working. So mostly that's npx prisma db push or whatever it is in pnpm. And then, yeah, the first steps box is kind of really the most important one because that has like all the information you need for database, for auth.
Makes sense. And it's not like you have a community dying for members. You got a lot of people in there already. All right, so this is our initial kind of home page. So there's a lot going on here. I'm going to just delete some stuff to kind of clean this up a little bit. And so, hello from Jam. Yeah. And then the interesting part of what's happening here is we have this little tRPC query. So if we kind of refresh, you'll see very, very quickly just a little flash of loading as it shows this loading message. And then once the query completes, you do this hello.data.greeting. Let me show the console here for a second. So in the network here, you can see where this is actually running. And this is the type of stuff you'll learn more as you get deeper into tRPC. So what is happening is this is hitting a route, which is API/tRPC/example.hello. And then it has all of this junk here at the end, which is for batching and then for feeding an input string, which is then URL encoded. So this is all of the type of stuff that you're never going to do by hand. This is a big part of what tRPC is managing for you under the hood, doing all that encoding and whatnot. And then if you look at the preview, you can see there's a result object, which has a data object, which has a JSON object, which has a greeting object, which has the greeting. I got all that right?
Yes. And specifically, the JSON object comes from SuperJSON, which is the tool that we use for serializing, deserializing the response. So you can also not use that. Then the greeting would be right in the data. But the advantage of having SuperJSON just on everything is that there's certain JavaScript data types that don't get sent over the wire very nicely. The kind of most common one I would say is dates.
Real quick, creator of SuperJSON, friends with
awesome.
Simon Knott. He was one of the original maintainers of Blitz. So this is where you can see that history I laid out at the beginning. This is where you can see downstream how it started to affect some of these projects. SuperJSON was built for Blitz. Create-t3-app is pretty similar to Blitz. Thus, it makes sense the stuff that was built for Blitz might also be useful for create-t3-app.
Yeah, it's an awesome little community of like type safe end-to-end JavaScript where like Colin from Zod played a big part in it. I know Blitz also inspired Alex, the not quite creator of tRPC, because Colin also created like the first prototype of that, but like the person who basically created it in the form of what it is now. And yeah, everybody in like the community of end-to-end type safety is always influencing each other and copying from each other.
Yeah, it's great. It's one of the reasons it makes me kind of sad that because Redwood uses GraphQL, it gets like left out of the conversation, because that's also part of the point of Redwood and GraphQL is you get also end-to-end type safety. And I used to tell people the best thing to do is you can have, if you have a JavaScript project that attaches to a Prisma GraphQL kind of backend, you basically get all of the same autocomplete without having to actually write TypeScript. But at this point, like create-t3-app makes TypeScript so easy that it's really doesn't make any sense not to use it.
But I think Redwood also kind of pushed the idea that you can give people like a full stack toolkit and you can give it away for free, and that empowers people to build apps on it.
Yeah, and that's where they're clearly very, very aligned, and that's why, for me, FS Jam, the full stack Jam stack, like the term full stack was always the most important, was always the thing I wanted to emphasize. Why I always had to get into arguments with people about why Next.js was not a full stack framework, because then they would be all confused. They'd be like, "Why do I need this new full stack framework if I already have a full stack framework?" It's like, well, because you don't have a full stack framework. You've been lied to.
Well, I think Next.js is a full stack framework, but it needs a bit of help on the back end to be nice to use, I would say.
Yeah, I would call it maybe 1.5 stack framework. Yeah,
Well, the way I got into tRPC is I also tried to build like a nice DX full stack experience on top of Next.js API routes, because it felt really obvious to me that if you have a node server running, like why would you start a second one?
Mm-hmm.
You can have, the equivalent of like a mono repo, but in a single project, and it's so fast and you can share types.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the thing that I built wasn't a tenth as good as tRPC is in its current form. And that's like that's why I jumped off as soon as I saw tRPC, and like I was completely sold because I'd seen the difficulties of building this stuff. Like sharing types is easy, sharing schema is easy, but getting the front end and back end to know about each other is not that easy.
Mm-hmm.
And they solved that extremely well.
Yeah, I find that is something that really is a story that you'll hear a lot from people who get involved with higher level frameworks and projects, is that when they try and build something themselves and they encounter what is involved with that, and then they see a project that has had a lot of people spending a lot of time solving a similar problem, and they see all of the ways they solved it differently and nicer, and they're like, wow, it would have taken me an extra year to do this, or 10 years, or I would never even have been capable of doing this. And then they're like, okay, well, clearly this is worth investing in then, because you can see like you're climbing a mountain and it's like all of a sudden you can just like take an escalator halfway to the top.
Yeah.
And you're like, why would I not take the escalator? It's like, I'm not doing this for my health. I'm doing this to get to the top.
Yeah, the greatest one I saw recently is Minku, who is, I'm gonna get this wrong, but like project lead or something like that on Angular currently. He published a repo that he worked on 4 years ago. That was basically the like exact same thing. Yeah, head of product.
Okay, I should be following him apparently. Cool. I'll have to
So like
check that out.
I mean, he kept his private until very recently, but it just shows that like this is an idea that a lot of people found important, basically.
Do you remember what it was called?
It had RPC in the name, I think. So if you search for that, you might be able to find it. Yes, that one.
tRPC?
So I think there's not much of a README and not much information because it was just something that he hacked on.
Uh-huh. Interesting. And this is using Angular Universal, because Angular Universal was a very early, they used to have a term isometric. They used to call it isometric back in the day, when you wanted to have a project with code that could run in the front and the back end. Fascinating. Okay, cool. Yeah, let's not go down that rabbit hole. But so let's talk about what's happening here. So now we're in, so we saw the pages folder, which had our index, which is our next front end. If you ever used Next before, you'll recognize things like your underscore app.tsx file, and then your API route. This file always confused me, so let's not talk about this one first. Let's talk about the router first. So we have a kind of like root route, and it's now actually named root.ts. I think it used to be named something else, but this is where we're going to import our tRPC routes, which right now is just the example router. And then this thing right here is like the context, essentially. This is another one that confused me frequently about what was going on in this thing. So we'll talk about that also in a second. Let's first talk about the route, because this is kind of the core of tRPC, and Zod is how to write a route like this. So there's a top level example router here, and then this breaks down to a couple things. We have a hello route and a get all route. And then we have input and a query. So I'll kind of just let you go and start explaining this however you think makes the most sense.
Yeah, sure. So let's start at the most outside level, which is the router. So like you can think of a router basically as a folder that can contain other routers, so other folders, and then procedures, which are like files. And you can nest them. And it doesn't really matter how you nest them. The only thing that changes is like what you call them by in the front end.
Yeah, and
Like
so then
how you
this
would find a
is
file, basically.
the app router. So that's the topmost router level, and then you feed it in these individual files. So we're importing the example router from example, which is nested under the routers folder, and then these all get imported into the root. Correct?
Yes.
Yep.
And so the next step is a procedure. So if you've ever used Express or Fastify or any other backend, basically, then like the inner bit, the return greeting, whatever, like that's going to look very familiar. Like you have your inputs, you do stuff, and then you output something, basically. So it's not too different from any other API route. The big difference here is this input thing, which has something that looks, I think, kind of weird to people who haven't seen Zod before. But basically, like the way to think about it, I think, is that in traditional sort of Express APIs, what you do is like you check for all the ways the user submitted data could be wrong. And then for each of those, you handle it. So you say like, if input is not an object, return 400. If the object doesn't have a thing called text, return return error. If the text is not of type string, return an error. And that can get really long and repetitive and very bug prone, I would say. And with the input checking with Zod, you kind of do the opposite. You say like, what should it look like? And then Zod takes care of rejecting everything that it doesn't look like, kind of with a nice error message, and you can customize it, but the default ones are also really good.
And so for people who want to see something kind of edited here, so this is what we're seeing right here. We're seeing hello from tRPC because we're giving it an input of from tRPC. So if we change this to say this greeting is, it would then say this greeting is from tRPC. And if we went to the front end and gave it a different greeting, so this is where we're doing this hello.use query, we could change this to from JS Jam, and then we see it change on that end. So that is kind of your like most basic tRPC 101 in terms of how do I fetch something from the back end and then display it on the front end. And this is how we're type checking it. We're type checking that the input is an object and the object has text of string. And this is what allows us to, if we're making a mistake, like if we try and change the front end here, if we change this to a number, it should give us an error because now it's saying, hey, you're trying to give it a number, but it's not assignable to, it's assignable to a string. So you need to give it a string. You can't give it a number. So this is that instant kind of feedback of, okay, whoops, this needs to be actually something like that.
Can you explain briefly in a way that how or why this would be beneficial, just given a very low level or high level example, what this would break in that process? So like, why would someone say, okay, this needs to be type safe for text versus numerical, and then what would it potentially break? Give an example, I guess, maybe.
So for example, like say you have a database query that looks for something by an ID, and you know that the ID has to be like a CUID or UUID or something. You can write a Zod schema that says this input has to be that, because what happens otherwise is it's going to depend on like what database you're using or what ORM and what the implementation is, but it's either going to return nothing, it's going to throw an error. As soon as you don't clean your input, like pretty much anything can happen in TypeScript, because then you're just back to untyped JavaScript land.
Here's another, I think, even kind of more like relatable example. Imagine you're building a banking app and you're trying to show someone like you have transactions from this month and you want to show people the total of everything you spent this month. And then the output where you're showing the total, you're taking the total of the transactions and adding that with the names of the transactions. Would that make any sense? No, because you can't add a number to a name. Right. So that would lead to a bug and your whole UI would explode, or it wouldn't explode and you would just have an error in the output where you're supposed to see the total. So those are the types of mistakes it can catch as well.
Yeah, and the other thing is it's also not even always about catching mistakes in the moment. It's also like in a bigger app, if you have this endpoint and then you talk to it from 5 different places in the code base, and then you need to change the endpoint. And suddenly, like, how do you know all the places in the front end that this endpoint was talking to? In the case of tRPC, like if you change your endpoint to return something, for example, that is different from what it was before, so the original stuff isn't there anymore, then you'll get a TypeScript error in every file that talks to it and tries to use the stuff that doesn't exist anymore. And so if you have a place that uses it incorrectly, then you'll find out at the very latest during your build step. And probably even before that in your editor.
That makes sense, Scott?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what I'm going to do now is, just so we can really quickly show some Prisma stuff, I'm going to spin up just a database here on Railway. So you already have it set up with SQLite. So if you want to, you actually can just kind of spin up a local database, which is pretty nice. But I like to kind of show a whole example with an actual deployed database here. And all you got to do is open up Railway CLI, initialize a project, and then add a Postgres database. Have you ever used Railway, Christopher?
Yes, I have. I think one of my apps is currently running on it.
Nice. I need to log. Actually, could you stop showing my screen for a second, Scott?
Yeah, all good.
Yeah, Railway is awesome. Their free tier is really generous. They send you nice warnings when you start getting into overages. Just a really pleasant developer experience, I think, for a database or for anything else you want to put on there.
Yeah, Railway is super duper sweet. What I really like about it is just how quickly you can spin things up with it, because I do lots of demos. So I'm always needing to just really quickly spin up a database. And then it's just like, here you go. Here's your database. One thing I didn't have set up correctly. Let's do, yeah. Two-factor auth, gotta be secure. Okay. Yeah. You can share my screen again.
All right, we're live.
Okay, so here now we have our Postgres database. Grab the connection string over here, .env, and database URL. And then you gave us in the very beginning when we initialized the project a command here, pnp prisma db push. And it's not quite a database migration. It's just a way to set up the database without running a migration. So whether you want to do a database migration or not is a philosophical question I cannot answer for you.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I like pushing the schema because it feels more declarative to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I know there's also a lot of people who are still into migrations.
Yeah.
I've just never had anything but problems with them.
Makes sense, yeah. Okay. So I think if we just do, yes, this is the Actually, I think I know. Can we create this through Prisma Studio, like a little example? Because the way you have your schema set up, we just have this example model, which just has an ID created at and updated at. So let's try this. Okay, there we go. So if we do that, we now see we have one of these. So all I did to do that was I ran pnpm Prisma Studio. Prisma Studio has some weird bugs. I wouldn't recommend relying on it too much, but sometimes it's good in a clutch for things like this. So now we can see this is in our database. And if we go back and look at our what was happening in our example route, we had the hello query, but then we also have this get all query. So if we do /API /gRPC /example dot, yeah, I think that, oh no, that didn't do it. So let's see. We have this. So I was trying to just basically take this and then do the get all query. You get me, Christopher?
Yes.
Oh,
Is it maybe that your dev server is still talking to an old database and you haven't restarted it?
You got it. Good call. Yeah, anytime you add environment variables, it loses the plot.
Good to know.
I think now you're on .hello.getAll.
That's right. So it should be just .getAll. Okay. Boom. Okay, that's exactly what we want. So now we see this is actually hitting our database and showing us through our Prisma query. So what this is doing is doing prisma.example.find many. So that's a Prisma syntax thing to where you can just dump out a list of examples. So if we were to go back to Prisma Studio and create okay, that's still running good. If we create a second example, then it'll give us a list of these now. So we'll do that. Now we'll have 2 of these and then refresh here. I'll make sure this is still running. And then now we see we got both examples being displayed. That's the first ID. That's the second ID. Cool. So that is kind of our like full stack project. Since we're running short on time, we won't show mutations and all of that. But yeah, this is a pretty good kind of hello world example. Do you have other questions, Scott, now that you've kind of seen the whole end-to-end thing?
Yeah, I mean, there was just, I mean, it's just gonna, being able to know all the prompts, to go to the command prompts, to do everything. Yeah, but yeah, it's
yeah, and that's where
I understand
the docs. So if you're just looking for things like that, like commands and things, this is, I think, maybe one of the weaknesses of the current docs right now, which is that they link you out to other docs for the most part. So if you wanted to know how to do any of those Prisma commands,
right,
I was showing you, you won't necessarily find those in the docs. You have to go to the Prisma docs and then to find the CLI. And this is also why I would recommend, instead of necessarily like use the docs if you have questions, but you should first follow along with one of the tutorials that was mentioned at the top that we'll link to, like Nexel's tutorial or even my tutorial, because that'll include all of the commands you need along the way. But for Prisma stuff, you can find that here. Just search for the Prisma CLI.
Yeah.
Right,
I was just thinking about what Christopher said earlier about
very slow on my internet, but you get the idea.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what Christopher said earlier about, not necessarily remembering a ton of stuff and having to, but his brain can say like, oh, well, I know that I need to go here to find that information and, utilize it. Right. So, very, very similar in that aspect. So.
And if you go on the docs, there's a page called, I think, Getting Started, and that's going to have probably 80-90% of what you need in the first hour or two of starting your app. So like how to set up your database, how to set up your auth, how to get like to the point of a fully working app. And then it's kind of a difficult line to walk for us of how much we want to replicate the docs of external projects. Because we are by definition always going to be behind them, basically. Like whatever they change, we need to figure that out as well. And also, hopefully, they're going to do a better job of explaining it than us, basically.
Sure.
So where we try to write docs is like where it's overlap between more than one package, or where it's like specific to what we're doing with create-t3-app or with the T3 stack. And then we defer as much as possible outside. It's also less work.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. Absolutely.
What was the page you said?
I think it's Getting Started.
Oh yeah.
You had your windows expanded before.
There's first steps.
Oh yeah, first steps, right?
That's the one you're talking about. Yeah. Cool. So there you have your Prisma DB push command.
Right. Yep.
It just tells you what to do with your environment variables.
Right. But use PNPM instead of NSX.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which you were showing that.
Cool. Are there other things?
You were showing that the command.
Sorry,
when you first loaded it up, and you had that. You were able to scroll up and see like the command and the DB push.
Yep.
Command.
Yeah. This it gives you when you first generate the project.
Right. Exactly.
So my internet is taking its sweet time right now, but what I'm going to do is spin up a fresh project that does not use a database, so that we can deploy that to fly without having to worry about managing that environment variable. But while we're doing that, are there other things you want to talk about, Chris, that weren't covered within that kind of demo?
In terms of create-t3-app, I don't think so. I think like the best way to get started with it is just to initialize an app and have a look around the docs and just start typing away, basically. And yeah, I think if you run into any problems with it, we have an amazing Discord full of people who are always happy to help with pretty much anything.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the community and the Discord. I will just give one piece of caution, which is that the Discord itself kind of doubles as Theo's. Actually, can you stop sharing my screen again real quick? The community kind of doubles as both Theo's community and the create-t3-app community. And Theo has a kind of philosophical belief that he does not want beginners in his community, or he at least does not want them to be asking beginner level questions in his community. So if you show up and just like find the first channel and start asking random questions about how to set your project up, you will get scolded and possibly banned. So just be aware of that. There is a specific forum for asking questions. So just make sure you read the rules and you kind of know what the right etiquette is. It's not the go ahead.
I'll just say this. I feel that's true with like anywhere you go to get information, right? Whatever the forum is, there's always, for the most part, especially when you're a beginner, you're asking questions that 100 other people or 1,000 or 1,000,000 other people have asked. And the same thing goes on like Stack Overflow, right? When you go to Stack Overflow, if you're asking a bunch of questions that have already been answered in other forums, then it's like,
but this is also why Stack Overflow got a reputation as not being a very nice place to go, and I don't think Theo's Discord wants the same reputation as Stack Overflow.
No, I think it's a fine line to walk. Like if you're new, like, you can say to people, oh, you should have searched for this, but maybe you don't even know what words to type in the search because you don't even know like what category of thing you want to find out about, basically.
True.
And I
That's
think that the Discord is very open to that. What it's very strict on is like, we have a questions place, so please post your questions there. Don't clog up other channels. Which, like, when you have, I think we're at over 10,000 users now, like some of that kind of becomes necessary, like a bit of the like policing that the channels are being used correctly. But I would say it's actually beginner friendlier than maybe the way Theo talks about it would make it seem.
Yeah, no, I think that's true, and it's just like people who do show up and don't read the welcome messages. There's like a very kind of immediate response to it. So that can seem harsh, but it's just more like they're managing a lot of incoming people, and they kind of have like a system. So if you show up and you ask a question in the wrong place and you get yelled at, like try to take it personally and just know like they're managing a lot. But if you are a beginner, like there is still a place for you. It's just kind of try and be aware of what the vibe is. Okay, so I was just because my whole computer is running super duper slow right now. I'm just going to show people that I already have a version that was kind of pre-deployed, and literally the only command I ran is you run fly launch, and then the CLI will walk you through picking a region closest to you, and then it will ask you whether you want to deploy it or not. If you don't deploy it, if you choose no, then you'll type fly deploy to do a separate deploy step. But if you do say yes, then it will detect that you're using a Next.js project and then just deploy it for you. There's going to be extra steps if you have environment variables and things like that. So it's not always going to be that simple. But if you want to just take this hello page and throw it on, you can do that. And this is the link right there, jsjam-ct3a-test.fly.dev.
That's awesome to know that it's that simple. Is that like, does Fly have their own CLI that you download from Homebrew or something like that? Or how does it work?
Yes, yeah, Fly has their own CLI that you'll download, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's going to be great to be on more services or to have the documentations on how to be on more services. Like, we love Vercel, but I think the best case you can make for Vercel is if there is an off-ramp as well, if that makes sense. So it's great to be on like $5 VPS, Fly, flight control, like anywhere we can be, we want to be there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So we'll definitely get a sweet Edgeo integration going soon. Cool. Yeah, this was super fun. I think this is probably about good for wrapping up. People can go check out create-t3-gg to learn more about the project. I always ask people to share their own socials. How would you verbally share your own socials to people?
It's
or the
4
exact
times
number
the
of
letter
C's,
C.
J's, and E's?
at
4?
quadruples.
Okay.
CJ.
Yeah, it's all quadruples. When I made this, I didn't realize that people were going to follow me on Twitter. Like, I just use it for reading Twitter for a couple of years, and then like I replied to a few people, and suddenly I had followers. So maybe this needs to be changed at some
Now
point.
that I know it's 4 letters of each, that actually helps. I had never counted them, so I didn't realize that.
But yeah, I would say that's the main place to find me. I also have a YouTube channel, which is the same username. So 4 times the letter C, 4 times the letter J, 4 times the letter E.
Yes. If you're listening to this audio bit,
And it's pronounced
C.
siege.
G. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly how it's pronounced. Other places you can find me, Discord. I mostly hang out on the T3 Discord, although I'm also on the Solid Discord, the Astro Discord, the Tanspec Discord. Whenever like I have time to be on those places, and I think that's mostly it.
Awesome. One thing I want to bring up really quick is something we had mentioned earlier, and it just clicked again when we were talking about not knowing what to search, right? Like not knowing, like, hey, what am I even looking for, right? And so therefore you need to like reach out to somebody that way, right? as a beginner or someone who's new to something, period, that you're learning. And this is the huge benefit of ChatGPT. I'm telling you, like, when you're working with ChatGPT and it has the context of everything you've done with it over the last 4 or 5 hours in that conversation, it knows when you ask a question about something, what you're referencing. Whereas if you were working before ChatGPT was a thing and you were doing this on your own, you would have this new question that comes up, but there would be no context when you go to search it in Google or Stack Overflow or anything. So ChatGPT has the context and it points you and it knows. It's like, oh yeah, that is X. You need to do this now. You need to go here now. It's amazing. And it just, the other thing I'm thinking about is how all these other frameworks and things are using like ChatGPT to be able to search their docs and things like that, right?
Mhm.
That is going to be the ultimate thing now that people can potentially, this is my thought, I don't know how this would work, but use that service that those frameworks are using or tools or whatever it is to build out their app, right? And give it the context that it, so that it has the context. Like you're almost like writing a doc as you're building this out with ChatGPT. And then it knows the context so that when you go to ask it a question, it'll automatically bring up that part in the document. You know what I'm saying? Without having to know exactly what to search for. It's crazy. Like, I don't know. I think there's something there.
Yeah, true. I think there's been sort of chat bots for your code base and chat bots for the docs, but to give it like the context of both could be really exciting.
Super powerful. Yeah. Because it already is powerful, even just by itself. Cool.
Yeah, I
Well,
saw
yeah, thanks.
some project someone posted about how to hook up ChatGPT to a Git repo and ask questions about your repo. So that could give it full context if you have docs in the repo and a project or something like that. Yeah, I think most of those kind of tools are probably still early days, and eventually Microsoft is going to build all that stuff with the power of OpenAPI actually part of them. So I would say probably hang tight, and then eventually we're just going to be able to talk to our code bases. It's going to be really awesome.
Yeah.
And I still think there's gonna be a time and place for human instruction or for human guidance. But most open source projects are currently in a place where the docs are not very good. And so being able to kind of talk to the project without somebody needing to write like kind of the cookie cutter documentation is going to be really nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
then
And
you can
just like
focus.
helping with the bandwidth of the maintainers, because that's another problem, is that the maintainers don't have to sit down with every single individual person and walk them through their own errors.
Yeah, that's quite exciting. And I think like when you're at the start of an open source project, like it's fun to talk people through their issues, because then you realize like how your APIs maybe could be better and more intuitive. How could you document it better? How can you lead people to the right places in documentation? So I think there's a lot of value in like being there like actively as a maintainer, but at the same time, like having a tool where people can sort of fix their own problems is super awesome.
Maintainer GPT.
For sure. Cool. Awesome. Well, I think we can close it out here. And yeah, this episode, when you'll see it, will probably be somewhere around mid-April. So if you're seeing this and you want to get involved, you want to learn more about the project, just reach out to these links and resources we have provided. Everything will be in the show notes down there over somewhere. And yeah, thanks so much, Christopher, for joining us. This was a ton of fun. Thank you for all the work you've done on tRPC and create-t3-app and being involved in the community and all that stuff. I think that you're going to have a very sweet DevRel job probably very soon, if that's something you're interested in pursuing.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks a lot for having me. And also like thanks to the entire tRPC team and everybody who contributes there, and also the entire create-t3-app team and everyone who's involved there. Create-t3-app has at this point over 200 contributors, and if it was only the core team, we wouldn't be much of a project at this point. So it really is all of the other people who drive it.
Awesome. Thanks, man. This was great. Appreciate everybody. And we'll see y'all in the next
one.
See you in the next one.
Peace.